Welcome to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Colin Jones, President-elect of City Club. For more than a century, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people work together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live and explore. We're gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel and are joined by thousands of Oregonians via X-Ray FM's radio stations, KGW's website, Facebook feed and news app, and OpenSignal's community media television stations. In addition to City Club's valued media partners, volunteers and staff have worked hard to make today's event possible. Please join me in showing our appreciation. Today, we will hear from the Democratic primary candidate seeking to represent District 24 in the Oregon State Senate. Kalpana Krishnamurthy will moderate our debate today. Kalpana is the National Field and Policy Director at Forward Together, where she directs state-based organizing and civic engagement programs, in addition to national policy work. Kalpana's resume is quite impressive, with experience including youth, racial, and gender justice organizing, philanthropic leadership, and the development of state-based racial equity report cards, and more. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Welcome to the candidates and the voters that are here with us today. On stage with me today are the candidates for the Democratic primary in Senate District 24, Shemia Fagan, Kayse Jama, and Rod Monroe. In a moment, they're each going to have 90 seconds to introduce themselves before we dive into our questions for the day. Each question does have a time limit, which is displayed on an extremely large clock that is facing the candidates. When the candidate has 15 seconds left and when their time is up, our timekeepers will hold up a placard for both the audience and the candidates to see. Our panelists in the audience should know that if the candidates go past their allotted time, their microphone will be cut off. And the discussion will move on. Now, in Oregon, we are known for our civic engagement and dialogue, and I am confident today will be absolutely no different. I trust that the candidates are going to focus on sharing their vision with the voters and will refrain from personally attacking one another. I'd also ask our live audience to please refrain from clapping or cheering during the debate. It's important that the broadcast audience joining us can hear from all of the candidates without distraction or interruption. However, now is the moment to welcome all of our candidates to the stage. We're going to go ahead and get started again with our 90-second introductions. The speaking order was determined at random ahead of time, and we'll begin with Mr. Jama, then go to Ms. Fagan, and then to Senator Monroe.
Good afternoon. Let me first of all say thank you so much for inviting me to this forum. This is the place for about 2000. I met with my wife, who used to be the City Club of Communications Director, so I'm grateful that I'm back here. Thank you. You know, I came to this country as a former refugee from Somalia. I have been an organizer for 20 years. I worked hard in this community for the last 20 years to make sure that we have equitable state and equitable community. I have seen it all. I worked with many different communities. I'm a civic engagement person. I like to bring people who are diverse background together. We are in this time in a crisis, in this state, in this community. I have seen it all. We, District 24, has huge issues, including housing, economic justice, environmental issues, and transportation issues. I have seen all. Last 20 years, we even discussed the issues of housing, and we are still facing housing crisis issues. I want to support to make sure that we have housing outcomes for all our community, make sure that we have rent protection, and we want to make sure that we take care of our community, particularly those who are underrepresented community and those who are on the bottom of the barrel. We have to work together as a community. We have to make a new vision, and we have to make Oregon a better place for all. Thank you.
I'm going to ask again that people hold their applause. Thank you very much. Ms. Fagan.
In 1997, my big brother was driving us to East Portland to see my mom for the first time in several years. I was 15, and my dad was a single parent. My mom hadn't been around much as she was struggling with addiction and was living on and off the streets of East Portland. But she finally had a home and invited us to come visit. And I remember my brother pulled up to this big, beautiful, kind of Victorian-style house with a huge wraparound porch. And we were thinking, wow, Mom, nice house. She greeted us and then walked us around to the front steps. But instead of walking up the steps, she dropped to her hands and her knees and she crawled under the porch. And then she invited us into her home. My brother and I dropped to our hands and our knees and we crawled into the porch behind her, and we spent the day with her there. And my mom, like most people who experience homelessness, didn't drive around with a U-Haul full of belongings. She had one box that she kept with her that was full of pictures of us and letters from us. Too many politicians approach Oregon's greatest challenges as empty statistics, but not me. I know that everybody struggling is somebody's somebody. Somebody's grandpa, somebody's daughter, somebody's friend, or somebody's mom. And our somebodies deserve to know someone is fighting for them in Salem. My name is Shemia Fagan, and that's why I'm running for the Oregon State Senate.
Thank you. Senator Monroe.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the City Club. It's been a long time since I was here, about 15 years ago when I was running for Metro President. I am a progressive Democrat, strong progressive Democrat. I voted for equal pay for equal work. I voted for reproductive health care. I voted for higher minimum wage. I voted for gun safety, closing the boyfriend loophole in the last session. I worked very hard on 3 issues in particular during the last session. First was education. Because I was chair of the Education Subcommittee, I was able to obtain an extra $100 million for our schools. And because of that, our school districts are hiring more teachers today for smaller classes. I also am one of the authors of the Oregon Promise, providing educational opportunities for all of our students to at least have 2 years of community college. I've also served on all 3 of the transportation committees and was able to provide $5 billion to fix our highways and bridges and to double the amount of transit available statewide. Also housing. I am responsible for the $30 million a year for housing, and $7 million of that goes for veterans. Thank you for your support.
If you're just tuning in on the radio or online, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. My name is Kalpana Krishnamurthy. I'm the National Policy and Field Director at Forward Together. Today we're hearing from the candidates running in the Democratic primary for Oregon Senate District 24, Shemia Fagan, Kayse, Jama, and Rod Monroe. We'll move into our first questions, and we'll go in the same order for this question that you were on the stage. Oregon's population is changing, and Senate District 24 is a great example of this. According to the census, people of color now make up over 35% of the district's 127,000 residents. How do you intend to work in the legislature to serve a growing population in Oregon towards better racial equity outcomes?
So for the last 20 years, as I said earlier, I have been engaging issues of racial, economic, immigrant rights, justice for this state. I have organized 5 years, 20 years for District 24. Let me tell you a story about community members that I work with. We have community members who are right now, as we are talking about this stage, women who are not able to go out of their house because of fear of Islamophobia. We have immigrant refugees who are afraid because of ICE issues. We have racial disparities in this state. If I'm given the opportunity to serve this community, my goal, as I did last 20 years, my goal is to bring people who are being most impacted at the table, engage with them, do systematic approach on this issue, as I did for the last 20 years. I'm someone who's committed systems change, and we have to make sure that the community we are representing are mostly served by by us and by all communities. If I am given the opportunity, if I go to Salem, business is not going to be as usual. I will bring the voices of those communities that we are talking about to the table to ensure that they are engaged, to ensure that their voices are heard, to ensure that their ideas and their policies are brought up to the table. That is my focus. That is what I'm going to do if I'm given the opportunity, and those are the voices I will bring to Salem with me.
Thank you. Ms. Fagan, how would you intend to work in the legislature to serve our growing diverse communities with racial equity outcomes?
First, let me say that white allies, strong white allies, are no replacement for proportional representation for people of color, period. We are very lucky in this district to be represented by Representative Diego Hernandez. He represents East Portland in the Oregon State House. His mother is a Mexican immigrant, and he is a fierce leader for immigrants and people of color in East Portland and all across this state, and we are fortunate to be able to follow his leadership. As I've worked with immigrant families throughout my career as a civil rights attorney and also as a legislator, secure housing is a top priority for our families. In fact, I did a town hall meeting with Community Alliance of Tenants a few years ago, and I learned from dozens of immigrant families about the deplorable conditions that they were living in. Leaks coming through their child's bedroom ceiling, ovens without power, locks that didn't work. And I offered to call their landlords as an attorney and demand habitable conditions. And to a person, these immigrants asked me not to call because they were afraid they would then face a no-cause eviction or a rent increase. For our immigrant families, for our families of color, we need to end no-cause evictions and stabilize rents in the state of Oregon.
Thank you. Senator Monroe.
Well, thank you very much. For the last several decades, I have been the Senate's representative on the Commission on Black Affairs. I'm the only Caucasian on the Commission on Black Affairs, and I asked them one time, I said, wouldn't you rather have one of the senators of color or House members of color? And they said, no, you do more for us than anybody else could possibly do. When I was growing up, Martin Luther King was my great hero, and when I became a father, I named my son Martin because I've always been thrilled with his life and what he stands for. I watched the young people a couple of weeks ago turn out by the millions to ask for serious gun control because gun problems face the neighborhoods of color to a greater degree than they do Caucasian neighborhoods, and we need to deal with those issues. So as we move forward, I have been a strong supporter for every attempt to get more teachers of color. So we have Hispanic teachers teaching Hispanic schools, and we have African American teachers in African American schools. And as a lifelong educator, I've worked hard to achieve those goals.
We're going to continue in this vein for another question. In the past year, we've seen significant rises in anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States and here in Oregon. In fact, it's been nearly a year since a white supremacist attacked 2 young women on the Max and killed 2 bystanders who intervened. In the November 2018 election, we anticipate an anti-immigrant ballot measure that would attempt to repeal Oregon's 30-year-old sanctuary state law. What's your opinion on this proposed ballot measure, and what do you think the state legislature needs to do to ensure immigrant communities in Oregon are welcome? We'll start with Ms. Fagan, then move to Senator Monroe, and wrap up with Mr. Jama.
First, please don't sign IP 22. It has been shown that the signature gatherers are using manipulative information to actually make people believe they're signing something to strengthen our sanctuary law as opposed to repeal it. So please do not sign IP 22. That's my public service announcement portion of today. We have to make sure that A, doesn't even get on the ballot, and if it does, we have to defeat it wholeheartedly and show that Oregonians stand with our immigrant families all across the state. Oregon is a sanctuary state. We need to be strengthening our sanctuary laws, not repealing them. And in particular, we need to make sure that we're enforcing our sanctuary laws all across the state, particularly in rural areas where maybe local law enforcement or locally elected sheriffs might be sympathetic, as conservatives to President Trump or some of his more hardline immigration policies. We are a sanctuary state, and state laws trump local jurisdiction laws, and we need to make sure that all across the state, not just here in the metro area, that all across the state, that our immigrant families feel safe and they feel welcome here in Oregon.
Senator Monroe, what's your opinion on the proposed ballot measure, and what do you think the state legislature should be doing to ensure Oregon's immigrant communities are welcome here?
Well, I won't sign that ballot measure, and I strongly oppose it. And in fact, I was asked to sign it, and I gave them a talking to in terms of what we really need in this state. I'm proud of Governor Brown for standing up to Trump on this issue and many other issues. And that would be my position strongly. If there's ballot measures that are suggested that roll back civil rights, I will always oppose them.
Mr. Jama.
This issue is issues that's really important and dear to me. For the last 20 years, I worked as an immigrant refugee rights organizer and to ensure that our immigrant communities are welcome and Oregon is a safe place for all. And IB 22 is no different. I actually have served as the executive committee member of the folks who are trying to defeat IB 22. I know the issues. It's issues that really needs to be stopped. But importantly, more importantly, we need to go beyond saying that should be stopped. We want to make sure that we protect our immigrant refugee community, both documented and undocumented, from Trump administration. I was so grateful to work with the governor's office, Governor Brown's office, to make sure that we expand and strengthen our sanctuary cities. But more importantly, if I'm elected as a senator, I will be the person who will be representing those voices because I am one of them. I am one of those of you who are listening today in this radio. I am one of you because I am someone who has the similar experience. As someone who came to this country as a refugee, I understand what's like to be targeted. As a Muslim, as a black man, as a refugee, I know what that looks like. And I'm intended to fight and intended to protect the immigrant refugee community from Trump administration and anyone else who tries to attack our community.
Thank you. We're going to move on to paid family and medical leave. Many Oregon workers don't have access to paid family leave to care for a family member, and if they do, the definition of family that's used in these policies is too narrow and just doesn't reflect how our families look today. For the past 2 legislative cycles, advocates in Oregon have tried to move paid family leave legislation, which uses a broad and inclusive definition of family. What's your position on paid family leave and using a broad definition of family in the legislation? We'll start with Senator Monroe, move to Mr. Jama, and wrap up with Ms. Fagan.
Thank you very much. I'm a co-sponsor of that legislation, signed on, one of the strongest supporters in the Oregon State Senate for paid family leave and for a broad interpretation of what that means. So if a person has a spouse that is ill, then paid family leave ought to kick in. If they have children or even other relatives that become ill, paid family leave ought to cover that. It's very, very important that we give workers in this state the same kind of treatment that you find across most of Europe, where they have paid family leave. So I've not only signed on to that measure time and time again, I'm going to keep pushing for it until it passes.
Thank you. Mr. Jama, what's your position on paid family medical leave and the broad definition of family used in the legislation?
Again, this is an issue that I have been working and passionate about for a long time. We absolutely have to pass paid family leave. Very few of workers in this state and this community enjoy paid family leave so my goal is, if I'm elected and given the opportunity to be served, my goal is to make sure that we pass paid family leave. And we have to make sure that we include all families, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their family status. We have to protect every single one of those, and we have to provide equally for paid family leave.
Thank you. Ms. Fagan.
First of all, I do support the broad definition that was proposed and supported by Basic Rights Oregon to make sure that all of our LGBTQIA+ community members are supported and that their definitions of family are brought into and supported under this law. I'm a working mom. My daughter is a year and a quarter. So not only am I a proponent of paid family leave, I have used it and I have given it. I run a small civil rights practice, and just last month, my one of 3 employees came back from 12 weeks of full paid family leave after the birth of her first child. I believe that we're going to ask Oregon businesses across this state to offer paid family leave, that we have to do it ourselves. And I'm proud that my employee was 100% off work and 100% paid for full 12 weeks of leave. But it's not enough to just support it. Let's make it happen. We have to actually have people in the state Senate who are willing to take positions that make business lobbyists unhappy, that maybe some Republicans won't support. We need to have Democrats in the state Senate who are doing more than co-sponsoring bills, who are actually make sure that legislation has a hearing, passes out of committee, goes to that Senate floor, and actually gets a vote. I will do that on paid family leave.
Thank you. If you are just tuning in on radio or online, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I am Kalpana Krishnamurthy, the program director at Forward Together. That's not what I do there, but we'll say that is. Today we're hearing from the candidates running in the Democratic primary for Oregon Senate District 24, Shemia Fagan, Kayse Jama, and Rod Monroe. Let's move on to affordable housing. As we all know, Portland is in an affordable housing crisis, and the average rent in Portland has jumped over 41% since 2010 to around $1,200. Senate District 24 has seen the impact of Portland's gentrification, with folks moving into the district to find affordable housing and crunching all of the families there. In 2016 and 2017, the Oregon Legislature debated ending no-cause evictions, as well as how to incentivize developers to build more affordable housing, but has yet to take any significant action. How would you address the housing crisis that we face? We will start with Mr. Jama, then move to Ms. Fagan, and wrap up with Senator Monroe.
Actually, so first of all, I am actually someone who's been displaced in Northeast Portland, and that's why I live District 24. So I understand the issue is real. My actual rent when I was living in North Portland, in a matter of 2 years, my rent was increased to 45%. That's why I have to move to the Senate District 24. Senate District 24, I work with the families. Let me tell you, as a canvas 5 years ago, North District 24, I have this gentleman who said, I'm afraid to lose my house because of rent increase. That was 5 years ago, and things are under now even more crisis. If I'm given the opportunity, I'm going to focus 3 ways in the housing issues. One, those who want to buy homes, they must have ability, and we have to support it the way they can afford to buy homes. Secondly, we have to pass no-cost eviction. Third, we have to make sure that we have rent control. Finally, we have to understand the issue much deeper than we think. We have to ensure that we collect data about who's been impacted, which district, which area in this city, in this state, in this community, who's paying more than 50% of their income for housing. So data collection is going to be really critical piece. I'm going to be working hard to make sure that we have a data collection so we can understand who's been impacted and who's been pushed out of their homes. And the last thing I'm going to say, we have to address homelessness issues, and we have to move families out of the shelters to homes.
Thank you. Ms. Fagan.
10 years ago, I started my legal career as a pro bono attorney fighting wrongful evictions in Oregon. And I was overwhelmed by the fear that my clients lived with every day. There would be families, often with little kids, huddled in my office, not sure where they were going to sleep that night. And last year, on this campaign, I met Sandy. She's an 80-year-old woman who's been living in the same apartment for 15 years. Her lights went out, her overhead lights, 5 months before I talked to her. But she is so afraid of a no-cause eviction or a rent increase that she won't even make a maintenance request. So she can read her paper through the security light that floods in from her window in the morning if it's not raining. Or last week, I canvassed a house that was absolutely falling apart. A large window in the front of the house was covered in plastic with Safeway bags stuffed in it for insulation. The door was so deteriorated from wood rot, it was like knocking on a carpet. And it's a rental. Somebody is paying a landlord to live in that house. We are in the midst of a code red housing crisis, and the solution is permanent housing. So let's start by keeping families that are currently housed, by ending no-cause evictions, letting cities stabilize rents, allowing tenants to collectively bargain their leases, and making sure that every person facing eviction has access to an attorney to protect their civil rights.
Thank you. Senator Monroe, how would you address the housing crisis that we're facing?
Well, the way I have addressed the housing crisis is to provide funding for additional housing. We need more funding for low-income housing. We need more funding to take care of the homeless. And we took care of both of those problems to a large degree last session when I carried on the Senate floor the document recording fee, which was increased to provide $30 million a year in perpetuity, not just once, for housing. And this money will be used not only for rent assistance, but also to help first-time home buyers become homeowners. And 25% of it must be used for veterans housing. So we also passed a couple of pieces of legislation to deal with those homeless people that we find along the Springwater Trail in my district and in their little tents. This is $5.2 million that will be used, 50% of it in Multnomah County because that's where the problem is worst, and the rest of it in other parts of the state. Now, that wasn't all that popular with some rural legislators, but I talked to them personally and was able to get that in the final budget.
Thank you. Let's talk about the foster care system. A recent audit of the Oregon foster care system found serious gaps in the state's ability to care for our most vulnerable children. Oregon doesn't have enough foster parents, its child welfare workers are severely overworked and often burn out, and that leaves 7,600 children in Oregon foster care at risk. But these conditions have been a long time in the making, with chronic underfunding from the state legislature to the Department of Human Services. What steps must the legislature take now to ensure that Oregon's most vulnerable children are being taken care of? We'll start with you, Senator Monroe, move to Mr. Jama, and wrap up with Ms. Fagan.
This problem is dramatic. I have a number of friends who provide housing for these children that are teachers that I know or that are people that go to the same church I go to, and they don't get paid very much for that. It's a real public service. It's something that they care about, and so they're willing to take on these children. Many foster parents actually end up adopting their foster kids, or some of them, or a large number of them. But maybe the answer is that we need to prioritize this issue when we form the state budget and prioritize more money. And that may mean we need to raise some revenue. We have among the lowest corporate taxes in the nation. Perhaps that could be bumped up a bit and used for human resource needs as well as for public safety and education.
Mr. Jama, what steps does the legislature need to take now to ensure that Oregon's most vulnerable children are being taken care of?
About a month ago, I knocked the door as I was canvassing. The woman opened the door. I told who I am and what I'm doing. She immediately told me that she's a foster care mom, and immediately proceeded to me telling me that how frustrated she is with the system. As a person of color, she told me that she doesn't get paid on time. When she complains and demands actions, she's being labeled, quote unquote, as a troublemaker. So the workers of this issue, this foster care issue, it has to be audited, and we have to make sure that we take care of the workers. Second piece is that funding is an issue. For me, if we are not able to take care of our most vulnerable population, there is something wrong with that picture. We have to ensure that our children, particularly those who are in the foster system, being taken care of it. To start with, we have to fund. We have to make a complete audit system to ensure that we provide funding. And in order to do that, we have to tax our corporations. As Senator Monroe said, we have one of the lowest corporate rate tax in the country. And I have been working hard as Measure 97, when I was working on Measure 97, to ensure that we have a fair taxation in this state. We are taxing low-income and middle-class families and giving a corporate welfare for corporations. That has to stop. And if I'm given the opportunity, I will fight for that.
Thank you. Ms. Fagan, please tell us your thoughts on what the legislature needs to do now to ensure that Oregon's most vulnerable children are being taken care of.
Well, as a mother of 2 little kids myself, my heart honestly can't take the stories of neglect that you hear where some of these kids come from. These young kids have often lived more trauma than 10 lifetimes could hold. And when they sometimes then end up in the homes of somebody who is abusive, that is just criminal. So we need to hold Department of Human Services' feet to the fire and hold them accountable to make sure to protect these most vulnerable kids and to punish the people who harm them. But there are so many wonderful foster families across our state and potential foster families across our state who need better recruitment and training and support, including families who take in foster kids who maybe otherwise would be in the system. They deserve the full support of Oregon's foster care system. And while we're at it, let's fund real drug treatment for the parents who want their kids back, for the parents who are working hard and need wraparound services so they can be reunited with their families. Earlier this year, I met Lois, a 65-year-old woman who's raising her 5 grandkids because her daughter is in active drug addiction and homeless. One of the babies was a newborn when she got them, when she was 63 years old. So many kids are in foster care in the first place because their parents need the help that Oregon isn't funding. Let's fund mental health and drug treatment and reunite families in Oregon.
Thank you. Let's look at the criminal justice system. Disparities around race are clear within Oregon's criminal justice system. While only 2% of the state's population is African American, nearly 11% of Oregonians who are currently incarcerated or in community supervision are Black. These stats are because Black youth and adults are disproportionately arrested and prosecuted. In addition, we know that police accountability and racial profiling have been significant issues both in Oregon and across the country for the past couple of years. What role can the legislature play in reducing disparities in our criminal justice system and in police accountability? We'll start with Ms. Fagan, move to Senator Monroe, and wrap up with Mr. Jama.
Well, as I mentioned before, representation matters. And one of the women of color who's a state legislator, one of her top priorities is combating the school-to-prison pipeline. And she told me about when her Black 5-year-old boy was rowdy in school, she would get reports and it would say disorderly conduct for a 5-year-old. So she intervened and demanded that the elementary school not use criminal language when talking about her 5-year-old son. She's now working at the state to eliminate criminal language from use in our school reports. Her experience, her voice, her intervention are critical. Representation matters. And leaders of color have organized and created solutions that I will champion with them, like holding police accountable and ending the criminalization of poverty. We have to stop arresting students and using criminal language in student reports and student write-ups. We have to redirect public safety resources into restorative justice instead of purely punishment, and not allow criminal history to be used as a barrier to voting, employment, housing, and that includes the expungement of marijuana offenses.
Thank you. Senator Monroe, what role can the legislature play in reducing disparities in our criminal justice system and in increasing police accountability?
Well, this happens to be an issue that I've been directly involved in. About 4 years ago, the department came to the Ways and Means Committee, the Budget Committee, which I sit on, and said, we've got to have money to build a new women's prison because Coffee Creek is full. And I said, well, now, why do you need a new women's prison? And who are these people that you're locking up? And they said, well, 80% of the women in Coffee Creek did not commit any violent crime. They're mostly there for substance-type abuse crimes. And what happens? Their kids suffer, because almost all of them are mothers, and their kids suffer more than they do. So I said, well, now, why don't we deal with the real problem of providing mental health care, drug addiction care for these women so that they can stay with their family and don't have to be incarcerated. And so you know what? We still haven't built that new women's prison because I said no.
Thank you. Mr. Jama.
This is an issue that I have worked for also many years. Someone who also personally been profiled, I know what it's like to be profiled. The last session, 2017, we passed HB 2355, a law that makes sure that we stop profiling, that first of all, we're able to collect the data. Number two, we want to make sure that we have a training, anti-bias training for our law enforcement folks. Number three, we want to make sure that we ensure that the data collection is actually statewide and is mandatory. We didn't have that before. Finally, if we're moving forward, the root cause of the mass incarceration is the racial profiling. And we absolutely have to work to ensure our departments, our law enforcement department, has to stop profiling. One of the things that I'm going to be moving forward if I go to Salem is that I'm going to actually bring a bill that will stop called consent to search, which really making sure that law enforcement folks, if they stop somebody, they have to tell them, write for their memoranda, and also give them their contact information if they need to follow up with. That is one of the things that I'm going to be doing. Finally, we have to stop youth incarceration. We have to end youth juvenile incarceration. That's one of the things that I'm going to be working hard if I'm going to elect as Senate.
Thank you. It seems like every few weeks in our country, we are gripped by a mass shooting, whether it's the Pulse nightclub or a shooting in Reno or a school shooting. The United States has seen an unprecedented number of mass shootings that joins the epidemic of gun violence that Black and brown youth have faced for generations. In the wake of the Parkland shooting in Florida in February, Oregon lawmakers banned people convicted of stalking and domestic violence or under restraining orders from buying or owning firearms and ammunition. What else should Oregon lawmakers do to protect kids and not guns? We'll start with Mr. Jama, move to Ms. Fagan, and wrap up with Senator Monroe.
So let me tell you this. Yeah, I came to this country as a refugee. I am one who's been displaced because of gun violence from my country. I know what's like to be living under the gun. We as a society, as a community, have to stop this. This is a man-made issue. We need to address and we need to stop. If I given the opportunity, I will make sure, first of all, that we have to have a national background search for all people. Number two, we have to make sure that we provide mental health programs for the people who are. Number three, we want to make sure that children do not have ability to have a gun in their hands, in their families. Finally, let me tell you this, and this may be controversial, but I'm going to say it because it's important. If you own a gun and you want to exercise your Second Amendment, it's fine. But assault weapons has no place in our community. It has to stop. Finally, if you own a gun, I believe you should be able to purchase insurance. And you have to be registered as a gun owner. Those are things that I believe that can change this issue and bring a change necessary into our community. Those are some of the things that I'm going to be working if I'm given elected.
Ms. Fagan, what else should Oregon lawmakers do to protect kids and not guns?
Well, we have to get weapons of war off of our streets and keep all guns out of the hands of dangerous people. But Oregonians are getting frustrated with the glacial pace of progress on this issue coming from Salem. So just this year, 2 different groups have filed ballot initiatives because they actually want to push forward legislation that the Salem seems to not be able to move with. One of those is from families of loved ones killed at Clackamas Town Center 4.5 years ago. 3 years ago, in Charleston, South Carolina, the murderer who killed 9 parishioners at the Emmanuel AME Church was able to purchase a gun through a loophole that allows anybody to purchase a gun if their background check takes longer than 3 days. It's called the Charleston loophole. When that happened, the Oregon House, and I was in there at the time, we immediately acted to close the Charleston loophole. The policy died in the Oregon State Senate. For the past 3 years now, our Senate has had the opportunity to close the Charleston loophole, but nothing. It is time that our state Senate has a leader for common sense gun safety legislation.
Senator Monroe, what else should Oregon lawmakers do to protect kids and not guns?
You know, I was just talking to my good friend, Senator Burdick, who is probably the leading advocate for sensible gun laws in this entire state. And she said, Rod, she says, I really like dealing with you. Other legislators, I have to convince them that what I'm trying to do is right. But you're on board immediately. I have supported every attempt at passing any kind of reasonable gun laws. It's unfortunate that we not only incarcerate more people than any other country in the world per capita, but we shoot firearms far more than any other country in the world. You know, it's not China that's not safe. It's not Russia. It's the United States that's not safe. We need to do something about it. I will strongly support banning assault weapons. I will strongly support banning large magazines that hold a lot of, and I will strongly support total gun laws that require background checks for everybody before they purchase a weapon.
Thank you. If you are just tuning in on the radio or online, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Kalpana Krishnamurthy, the National Field and Policy Director at Forward Together. Today we're hearing from candidates running in the Democratic primary for Oregon Senate District 24, Shemia, Fagan, Kayse, Jama, and Rod Monroe. Candidates, in January of 2018, independent investigation found that Senator Jeff Cruz had engaged in a pattern of sexually harassing behaviors. It's been a well-known fact that the culture in the Salem Capitol building has been unsafe for women. For years, lobbyists, interns, and even women legislators have shared information about how to stay safe in the building. They have given each other advice like not going to certain offices alone, leaving doors open in meetings, and taking the stairs rather than elevators alone with specific legislators and specific lobbyists. That's what sexual harassment looks like. What needs to happen to ensure accountability and end sexual harassment in the Oregon State Capitol? We'll start with Senator Monroe, move to Mr. Jama, and wrap up with Ms. Fagan.
Well, I served with Senator Cruz, and he had a knack for getting in people's space, and particularly the women members. And those that suffered the greatest were not fellow senators that eventually brought the charges against him, but they were staff people who were afraid that if they said anything, they might lose their job. I strongly supported the action taken by the Senate President to remove Senator Cruz permanently from the building, taking the door off his office, and basically putting us through an additional study time of what is involved in sexual harassment and how we should properly deal with that. Now, my wife, Billy, she's back there, has been in my office during my whole career. And she has told me stories about how certain legislators, she simply wouldn't get in the elevator with them because they were abusive, would pinch and poke and cuddle. That's inappropriate. We must do everything to stop it.
Thank you. Mr. Jama, what needs to happen to ensure accountability and end sexual harassment in the state capitol building?
Well, the answer, first of all, for me, the first step is that hold accountable those who commit sexual violence against women, period. No one should be expected to be given an opportunity to sexually harass women. Secondly, it's important for me to listen to people who are being impacted by the issue. In Salem, we have to have absolutely no tolerance for sexual harassment or sexual assault in any case. I will work with the community. I will work with the women in the Senate and in the House to make sure that we listen to them, their solutions, and hear from them what they think the best solution will be. That will be, for me, the first step that I'm going to take. But as a commitment for me is, again, making sure those who are committed sexual violence will be accountable and shouldn't be given a pass for any circumstances. No one should be walking to Salem in that building and feeling whether they work or whether they are visiting, no one should be feeling that they are unsafe and for any circumstances, period.
Thank you. Ms. Fagan, what needs to happen to ensure accountability and end sexual harassment in the state capitol?
One thing we can do is elect more women, because representation does matter. But what's interesting about the system that happened at our Capitol is we all read in the newspapers the results of the investigation. What many of you probably don't know is what it took to get those results. Senator Sarah Gelser, who is the person who spoke up and was honored in Time Magazine's Person of the Year, she had to hire a private lawyer, probably one of the best lawyers in the state of Oregon, Dana Sullivan. But she had to hire a private lawyer. She had to have the means to hire a private lawyer to go through that process with her because it essentially had a mini trial. And I'm happy that Senator Gelser was able to afford to hire a lawyer. What about the intern? What about the paycheck to paycheck woman working in the Capitol who was just looking to advance her career? How does she get justice in this situation? The entire process has to change. And the Me Too movement helps make that change. Courageous women, many of you here in this room, spoke up or are still speaking up to say Me Too. I also said Me Too. And it's fun, it's nice that as women, our experiences are finally enough. We're believed, and our experiences are enough to justify change. But let's take it beyond that. Let's know that the Me Too movement is not just about women, it's about disempowered communities. So when people of color or people with disabilities or LGBTQIA members speak up about different forms of disempowerment, let's believe them and act.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end of our time together, so we're going to move into some lightning rounds, because who doesn't love a good lightning round? So I'm going to start you off with a softball. You only have 15 seconds. 15 seconds, okay? It's a softball, though. I mean, y'all should be able to hit this one out of the park. We'll start with Ms. Fagan, then we'll move to Senator Monroe, and we'll wrap up with Mr. Jama. What's the best thing about Senate District 24?
The people and the food.
Great.
Diversity. We are the most diverse district probably in the entire state, and that, with diversity comes strength.
People, diversity, and communities that are also struggling. Those are my people that I'm excited about to work with them in Salem.
Thank you. Okay, our next lightning round question, we'll start with Mr. Jama, we'll move to Ms. Fagan, and then we'll wrap up with Senator Monroe. Do you think that corporate taxes in Oregon are too high, too low, or just right?
It's too low, and it's about time that we hold the corporations accountable and have a fair taxation.
Too low. See if we can say that for 15 seconds. Yeah. Too low.
And I've been advocating for higher corporate taxes since I've been in the legislature, and that's quite a while.
Great. We're going to start with Senator Monroe. We'll move to Mr. Jama and then wrap up with Ms. Fagan on this one. How would you vote on IP1, a proposed ballot initiative that would prohibit the Oregon Health Plan from covering abortion for low-income women in our state?
I would strongly oppose that. I've been pro-choice all my life, and I'm totally pro-choice. I would not vote for any restrictions on a woman's right to choose.
I will agree with that. Absolutely vote no, and making sure that all women has their choices. So they have to make their own choice in their body. So I will absolutely oppose that.
I have a 100% certified pro-choice voting record from NARAL, and I would vote no.
Thank you. Last question in our lightning round. We will start with Mr. Jama, we'll move to Ms. Fagan, and then wrap up with Senator Monroe. The legislature currently requires a 3/5 majority to change our taxes. There is a ballot measure to eliminate this requirement. Would you support, oppose, or are you unsure?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
The legislature currently requires a 3/5 majority to change our taxes. There's a ballot measure to eliminate this requirement. Would you support, oppose, or are you unsure on this ballot measure?
I will support to eliminate. Absolutely.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry. I want to make sure I understand the ballot
right.
initiative.
That's all right.
It's a hard one.
The legislature currently requires a 3/5 majority to change our taxes, and there's a ballot measure to eliminate this requirement. Would you support, oppose, or are you unsure?
We should be able to pass tax increases with a simple majority. I'll say it that way.
Thank you. Senator Monroe.
Yes, I strongly believe that the 3/5 rule is in fact undemocratic because it allows a minority to dictate. This happened when the other party was in control of the legislature, and I would support any attempt to get it back to a simple majority.
Great. If you are just tuning in on the radio or online, this is the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, and today we've been hearing from the candidates running in the Democratic primary for Oregon Senate District 24, Shemia, Fagan, Kayse, Jama, and Rod Monroe. We've reached the end of our time for today's debate, and I'd like to invite all three candidates to deliver a 1-minute closing set of remarks. We'll go in the order that you are on the stage. So we'll start with Mr. Jama, we'll then have Ms. Fagan go, and wrap up with Senator Monroe.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here today. As I think about my closing statement, one thing comes to my mind. It's the people in the District of 24. District 24 is 37% people of color, 25% immigrant refugees. I think about the women, Somali women, who decided not to shop alone, but rather than group shopping. I think about immigrant refugees who are afraid because ICE is going to detain them. I'm afraid because I'm thinking about people who have been expected to be afraid that they will be profiled. This is the real issues. Families are suffering. It is time for us and new leadership to be sent to Salem. I am someone who has the same experience people who live in District 24. If I given the opportunity, I will make sure those voices will be in Salem with me, and those are people that I'm going to be representing if I given the opportunity. Thank you.
Ms. Fagan, closing remarks.
My mom passed away in 2014. She had been clean for nearly 6 years and was living in the first house she had ever owned. The minister who performed her service captured my mom's journey perfectly when she said, Trish reached the place of a stable life, just an ordinary life, a job and a house and a dog. But it didn't just happen to her. Trish fought for it with everything she had in her. So many of our neighbors are fighting just for the stability of an ordinary life, a job, a house, and a dog. But with Donald Trump in the White House, our families and our values are under assault. That's why there is a record number of women running for office this year to resist Trump, and I am one of them. My name is Shemia Fagan, and that's why I'm running for the Oregon State Senate.
Senator Monroe.
Well, first of all, I'd like to once again thank the City Club for this event. I'd also like to thank many of my supporters, firefighters, NARAL, electrical workers, plumbers, construction workers, hospital workers, chiropractors, and virtually every member of the Oregon State Senate. These are people that have already spoken out and said they want me to come back to the Senate. But I also have to pass that off with my wife, Billy. Now, Billy and I have been married over 50 years, and when we met, We put each other, we got married. My father married us. He was a minister. And we put each other through college. We both became teachers. And when I was elected to the legislature, she came down there with me and has served with me ever since. So when you vote for Rod Monroe for the Oregon Senate, you get 2 for the price of 1.
Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Colin.
Our time is up, and we need to pause the discussion for now, but we hope this is the beginning of an even more in-depth discussion for each of you. Please join me in thanking the candidates and Kalpana for being here today. I'd also like to say a special thank you to Matt Mahoney for producing this program. We appreciate all of the hard work that went into making today possible. Thank you all for coming. We are adjourned.